Good evening and welcome to On That Point. I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Freddie Hassett. Childcare is one of the most costly issues faced by parents of America. The state of Massachusetts is not immune to this major crisis.
COVID-19 has had an outsized effect on America's childcare system, and this holds true for Boston. The pandemic has widened the disparity between supply and demand of childcare and early childhood education.
A major compounding factor is single parenthood, as it makes accessing and paying for childcare a daunting and often impossible task. Massachusetts State Senator Susan Moran, appointee to the Senate Early Education and Care Economic Review Commission, filed the Common Start bill to address these issues. Alex sat down with her to discuss the bill.
So welcome, Senator Moran. Thank you so much for coming and sitting down with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to jump right into it. Before children reach elementary age, childcare is a parent's responsibility. In your opinion, is childcare government or a private responsibility?
Well, I think the government should be committed to raising healthy children that will contribute to society going forward. And I think that starts with having really good connections with the community at age 0. And I have legislation in Massachusetts, commonstartma.org, that does just that.
Why is it so important that kids have that early education?
We want to help families as best we can in terms of making childcare affordable, giving children the opportunity to be their best learners from the early days. And in terms of health, watching kids who may have challenges, being able to catch it with professionals early on. And those are 3 of the things that the Common Start bill would put us on track to do.
In Massachusetts, the average cost of care for an infant is over $20,000 a year, but the median household income in this state is around $85,000 for the U.S. Census Bureau, meaning that half the population makes less than that. Why are we seeing this imbalance between childcare costs and income?
Well, you're really putting your finger right on the problem. Parents and families are having to make a Hobson's choice at times between going to work, especially women, continuing their careers they've worked so hard for, versus taking care of their kids with childcare on a professional or family level, and also continuing their career. But it's also important if you look at kids' socialization, and when families have to choose between paying the rent or paying the mortgage or putting food on the table and educating their kids, we can do better than that as a society, and that's what this bill hopes to do.
How are single-parent families especially affected by inaccessible childcare?
In general, single families have less options. So if you are, for example, a working mom and you're trying to excel at your job and say your boss wants you to stay a little bit late, well, you get penalized, understandably, at the child care facility, oftentimes for being late because they don't always have staffing available. Staff has to get home to their families as well. So it creates a lot of stress at home. It creates challenges for the kids when they have that kind of high stress environment. So the concept here is to look at childcare as a reality and to accommodate that with government's help.
And Mayor Wu recently announced the creation of Boston's Office of Early Childhood near the end of February, and you were present at that press conference, I believe. So how is this office going to address the issues families face?
Well, Boston is a microcosm of challenges that we face all over the state of Massachusetts. My district, the Plymouth-Barnstable district, which spans the Cape Cod Canal, I represent 3 towns on either side, has similar issues in terms of challenges. But as compared with Boston, if you tackle that larger population and you look at what sort of initiatives are most helpful to families, and you look at the cost and how to roll that out, I appreciate Mayor Wu taking leadership in that, because I think the rest of the state is going to learn once those numbers are reviewed and the success of those programs is determined.
And Mayor Wu's also been a very vocal supporter of universal pre-K. Where do you stand on universal pre-K in Massachusetts?
Universal pre-K is a little bit different from the commonstartma.org bill. But that being said, I think that universal pre-K is a level playing field for families so that you don't end up with proliferating the most wealthy families being able to offer the most for their kids. It's something that we should be offering to all children. And the earlier we start, the more challenges we catch. All kids learn differently. Mm-hmm. And if we can really get our eyes on kids at a younger age, we'll be able to be more economic in the way that we manage childcare.
How has COVID affected America's childcare crisis?
COVID has laid to bear so many of our societal problems. COVID in itself, a lot of the first responders, families had to make a choice of one staying home with the kids to do Zoom learning, one going to work. So the financial crisis that COVID caused was exacerbated by the limitations in the current childcare system. A lot of childcare businesses and centers and family childcares were closed because of two things. One is that the requirements were too expensive to implement quick enough. And the second one is the fact that we had to lower our numbers which closed out a lot of families. So it really showed us that we're on the tipping point in our childcare system. And if we make investments now, we're going to end up with a healthier population moving forward that is more economically productive. And what better do you want for a healthy society coming out of COVID?
Yeah. How do you foresee the state legislature tackling some of these childcare related issues going forward?
Well, we've taken some great steps. We've done some early childhood economic review through a special committee that's chaired by Rep. Peisch and Senator Lewis, who's a co-sponsor on my bill, the Common Start. And it's made some recommendations. It pulled together experts from the childcare system, from the state system that supports childcare, from all kinds of learning situations. And it presented various issues and got all those great minds together to have a conversation about what's needed moving forward. And the recommendations of that report are just coming out. And one of the things I appreciate is that it takes a recommendation of a deep dive on the costs so that we can look at various models that might be less expensive but have a better outcome in terms of public support. And I'm hopeful that some of the challenging, sort of heavy administrative elements of programs that currently exist will be streamlined so that parents can have more access to childcare. The childcare providers will be able to spend more time on the actual learning element rather than filling out paperwork. And the childcare folks who work in the system will be able to see opportunities to grow in their careers moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Moran. Thank you for spending time with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
The childcare system in the U.S. today lacks accessibility and affordability. Massachusetts is the second most expensive state for childcare in the U.S.
With the increased cost of childcare, baby essentials and additional funds to raise a child, an exponential amount of parents and single parents struggle to get early childhood education for their children. Correspondent Kiara Smith joins us to talk about this high cost of infant care in Massachusetts.
Thanks, Alex and Freddie. Child care in the United States is posing to be an issue, as it not only is costly, but also unavailable to many. Data from the Economic Policy Institute presents that Massachusetts has the second highest cost of infant care across the U.S. The average annual price tag in the state is $20,913. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services federal standard considers child care affordable if it costs no more than 7% of a family's income. By federal standards, daycare is affordable for less than 1 in every 5 families in Massachusetts. In an interview conducted by WBUR, the Crettenton Women's Union President Elizabeth Babcock says they found that families in low-wage paying jobs cannot keep up with the cost, as they are continuously rising. Babcock says childcare is one of the biggest costs to families, as 31% of income goes to childcare, housing, and then taxes. On top of other essentials, diapers are also taking over more of families' income. The National Diaper Bank Network says 1 in 3 families struggle to provide enough diapers for their babies or toddlers across America prior to COVID, and has become worse over time. In Massachusetts, the network says that there are 212,910 children under the age of 3, and 17% live in families that earn less than 100% of the federal poverty level. Child care costs get even more expensive for single parents. Today, there are more kids than ever that live with one parent. The Pew Research Center says about 21% of American kids live with a single mom and another 4% with a single dad. In 1968, those numbers were 12% for moms and 1% for dads, which demonstrates a significant increase. A Crettenton Women's Union study found that a single parent would need to earn $65,880 a year to pay for food, housing, childcare, healthcare, and other basic needs for one school-age child and another in preschool. The study concluded that most single parents are earning less than they need to live. The living wage before taxes for single parents in Massachusetts is around $60,000 for one child, $70,000 for 2, and $85,000 for 3. These numbers are thousands of dollars above the equivalent for nearby states like Connecticut and Maine. Recognizing the issue, Massachusetts offers child tax credit to families due to the skyrocketing cost. The credit allows families to receive monthly payments of up to $300 for each eligible child under the age of 6 and $250 for children between ages 6 and 17. Adding together the monthly payments and the amount applied to tax returns, families can possibly receive up to $3,600 per eligible child. Back to you at the anchor desk.
Research in early childhood development has found that consistent quality care in the first few years of life are paramount to healthy brain development in children. Freddie sat down with Dr. Amanda Tarullo, a researcher at Boston University, studying the links between early life stress and later cognitive outcomes, to discuss the current research in her field and how it should inform policy decisions.
Today, I am joined by Dr. Amanda Tarullo, Associate Professor of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University. Now, your research has drawn clear connections between early life stress and later cognitive outcomes. What role does childcare play in mitigating these early life stressors?
That's a great question. In cases where there is adversity or instability in the home, high quality childcare can be a protective factor and can provide some extra help with school readiness, and particularly with helping kids to learn emotion regulation and language development, peer skills before they get to kindergarten. In a high quality childcare setting, that can be very helpful. Unfortunately, the same is not true of lower quality childcare settings, and often the same children who are experiencing adversity don't have access to high quality childcare, so they may be in a more chaotic or overcrowded setting, which can just be an additional risk factor.
One area of your lab's research is looking at the link between sleep and cognitive development. What have you found so far?
So we've seen that children who are sleep deprived tend to have higher biological stress and tend to have poorer school readiness. We and others have shown that children are less ready for kindergarten when they experience sleep deprivation and are more likely to have emotional problems. They're also more likely to have behavior problems because, as you can imagine, a child who is not well rested is more likely to act up, and then there's a vicious cycle where that same child is difficult to get to go to bed at night because they're acting up. And so that can be a very vicious cycle that contributes to poor school performance.
And with a clear link between poverty and child outcomes long established in the literature, what are effective methods in providing aid to parents?
Absolutely, that's a great question. One of the most important things to do is to address parent stress So parents who are under a great deal of stress, if they have food insecurity, if they're worried about getting evicted, if they're worried about losing their job, it's very hard to be emotionally available to your child when you're under that kind of overwhelming uncertainty. So providing unconditional cash transfers is one way to provide those supports, or any kind of programs that help alleviate concerns about housing or food. When parents are less stressed, also when they've received adequate mental health care. Those are some of the very best interventions that make the greatest difference in child outcomes. Providing direct parenting support can also be helpful, but really basic needs need to be met first. And childcare centers can be a really great way to address all of that, because it doesn't require the parent to go to many different places to get services. If they trust the childcare provider, center-based care that also helps link parents in with other supports that they need can really be a lifeline to families.
And what effect do you expect a universal pre-K program would have?
If it's high quality, so again, I keep going back to that because there have been many studies showing really profound effects of pre-K when it's like very high resources were pulled into it, something like the Perry Preschool Project, right, where there's very intensive services provided to families, and that shows great long-term outcomes. So what's important is that when we go to universal pre-K, that doesn't get diluted, that there's still being a lot of attention paid to quality and paid to meeting kids where they are both emotionally and cognitively. But with that, we would expect to see a closing of the achievement gap. And the reason for that is that 90% of the academic achievement gap is already there on the first day of kindergarten, right? Most of the achievement gap associated with poverty is coming from early factors, like less access to prenatal care, and like less optimal opportunities for brain development in the early years. And so high quality universal pre-K can be a great equalizer in beginning to close some of that gap and have a pre-K experience that is more similar to what privileged kids are already getting, so that some of those inequities are reduced prior to kindergarten.
And Boston has long had a lack of access to early education. It's been a problem that a lot of different mayors have tried to address. Is this problem such a Gordian knot, or is it a result of legislative inaction?
I mean, I'm not a politician, so it's easy for me to say, oh, it's legislative inaction. I would say that we have very clear evidence, even from an economic perspective, that early childcare dollars pay off. Every dollar you spend on early childcare saves $7 later in kids that are less likely to need special education or to be held back a grade, and more likely to pay more taxes later and be less likely to be in the prison system later, right? So there's far-reaching effects. It makes a huge difference to invest in early childhood. So economically, there's just no strong argument why it hasn't happened, except that the payoffs take a long time. And so that's politically challenging because a lot of the payoff you don't see right away. And so, I think that's contributed to, why it hasn't been implemented as greatly as we might hope.
According to the U.S. Department of Education, early childhood educators and caregivers in Massachusetts have an average annual salary around $25,000. Why do you think this figure is so low? And how does this impact the care our children receive?
I mean, our society does not reward teachers in general, and early childhood teachers even more so. And I think there are many excellent childcare providers who do it out of passion, even though they're not being compensated fairly. Right, but it's hard to sustain that. Many people can't take care of their own families on that amount of money, right? And so, if we value early childhood, then we need to be paying higher salaries to attract and retain a workforce that's going to provide higher quality care.
Professor Tarullo, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you for coming on the show with us, and we really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure, thank you.
With the recent Boston mayoral election, conversations surrounding the high cost of single-parent childcare have come to the forefront as Michelle Wu develops her plan for the issue.
Wu recently opened an Office of Early Childhood for childcare-related resources. With this office, Wu hopes to expand the accessibility for families.
And up on Beacon Hill, a docket of childcare-related bills await the Massachusetts legislation.
And that's a wrap for this episode of On That Point. We'd once again like to thank our guests for joining us.
And as we say goodbye, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at On That Point and like us on Facebook. On behalf of our entire crew here at On That Point, I'm Freddie Hassett.
And I'm Alex Dowd. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.